I'm Marian Arrowsmith, and welcome to our show. Today our guest is Dr. James Stafford. We're very happy to have you here. Dr. Stafford was a teacher in St. Tammany, an administrator, but he's had a number of other interesting jobs around the state, and I believe 2007 was your 50th year in as an active educator in our state. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So I know we'll have a lot of stories. Let's start a little with your background. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be interested in education.
Well, I guess I tried to. I had a great admiration for some of my teachers and tried to emulate some of those, and so it was just something I was interested in. And my initial training was to be a teacher, but I wound up being an administrator most of my career, and that was not something that I really planned. It just kind of happened.
You're not from St. Tammany Parish. How did you come to be in St. Tammany?
Well, I'm originally from Franklinton, and I moved back to Franklinton last year from Monroe. I'd lived in Monroe for 23 years. I went up there as superintendent of schools, and then retired from that position and was elected to the State Board of Education and served on Bessie for 16 years, up until last year. But how I came into St. Tammany is a pretty interesting story. I was in the Army, I think it was 1956, and I'd been to Fort Carson, Colorado. I'd been stationed at Fort Knox, and I was switched down to stationed in Fort Polk, Louisiana, which suited me fine because it was closer to home. And so I hitchhiked home one weekend. I had a long weekend pass, and hitchhiking back during that time was a common thing. And I had my soldier's uniform on and hitchhiked home, and I got a ride to Baton Rouge and with a friend, and then at Baton Rouge at the traffic circle, I attempted to hitchhike on to Franklinton. And so this car pulled over. This man in the car said, "Get in, soldier, where are you going?" And I told him that I was going home on leave to Franklinton. He said, "Well, I can get you as far as Covington." And so we rode on and we talked, and he said he had been to some kind of teachers meeting, that he was in Baton Rouge for that. So before we got out, he said, "Son, I kind of like the way you sound." He said, "What do you plan to do when you get out of the Army?" And I said, "I plan to be a teacher." He said, "Well, you know what?" He said, "I'm Bill Pitcher. I'm the superintendent of schools in St. Tammany Parish. So when you get out of the Army, call me and I'll give you a job." So I wrote him about a month before I was discharged and told him I'd like to talk to him about a teaching job. He had promised me one. So I had an interview with him, and he hired me to teach at Fifth Ward School at Bush. So that's how I came into being in St. Tammany. And after staying here 10 years, I was promoted to principal of Bayou Lacombe, and then I applied for a job as principal of Franklinton High School and was accepted. And I had to go before the board to get a release from my contract to take the job at Franklinton. And when I did, Mr. Pitcher made comments about me hitchhiking my way into St. Tammany. And Mr. Philip Burns, who was a board member at that time, said, "Yes, that this young man came in hitchhiking and he's leaving St. Tammany driving a Cadillac." And that wasn't necessarily true, but that's how I wound up in St. Tammany.
So you were a teacher at Fifth Ward. What did you teach while you were there? I
taught vocational agriculture, which was a pretty important thing for this parish at that particular time. Not only vocational ag, you had to teach a little bit of everything. I taught math, science, social studies, English, whatever was required. And this gave me a good general background on all of the subject matter. I didn't necessarily want to teach some of these things, but I did.
So that would have been 1957.
Yes.
What was Bush like back then?
Well, you didn't have all this Money Hill plantation suburb development out there. You probably had 220 students in the school. It was small.
And that would have been a 1 through 9 school?
It was a 1 through 9. St. Tammany at that time had a strong junior high system. Like you had a junior high at Lee Road, you had a junior high at 6th Ward, junior high at Pearl River, all over. Everybody had a junior high, and quite often it was a 1 through 9 organizational chart.
And then you went from 5th Ward to be principal at Bayou Lacombe Junior. Was that also a 1 through 9?
It was a 1 through 9, a small junior high school, and we had probably 250 students, something like that.
I think we have a picture of you here, a couple of pictures of you here when you were principal. And there's one here with your family, and I believe that's when you were principal at Bayou Lacombe.
That's right. I was living at Lacombe at the time.
Tell us a little bit about the people in the picture with you.
Well, I don't know if you can pick it up, but this is a picture of my family where we lived at Bayou Lacombe. This is my son, Bill, and he's now working with the Secretary of State's office in Baton Rouge as head of the Archives Library section. And this is my daughter, Fran, and she's now principal of Madisonville Junior High School.
And we know her as Fran Shea.
Fran Shea. And this is my son, Jimmy, and he's a supervisor of the area biologist section of wildlife and fisheries, and this is my wife, Lillian. So that's the group I had.
And we have another picture of you sitting at your desk when you were principal.
Yeah, this is showing me a lot of years younger when I was at my desk. And this is the first boys and girls basketball team that they ever had at Bayou Lacombe. We'd just gone through a bond issue, and they built a new gymnasium down there, so everybody felt like we had to have a basketball team in the little junior high league, and so we got that.
Who were some of the people that were influential while you were here in St. Tammany that you remember?
Well, when you look at the leadership, first of all, Mr. Superintendent Pitcher, Bill Pitcher, he was a heck of a guy, tremendous personality. You know, he got along with people, all of the senators and representatives and politicians that he needed in order to promote the school system, had an excellent rapport with these people, all of the State Department of Education people, and just a very likable person. And he handled the administrative part, dealing with the board and all of that, but I think a real key to St. Tammany's academic program that they have today was a guy named Henry Mayfield, and he was the assistant superintendent and handled just about everything that Mr. Pitcher didn't want to handle in the central office. He was a brilliant man. He selected and recruited good people to come in the system. He would encourage teachers to go back and get their master's degrees and to have professional development and go to workshops and really set the tone for the foundation for education in St. Tammany Parish. What we have today, I think, was built on a lot of the things that he and other people did. I remember Glenn Brock was a highly respected person from down at Slidell. He had been a principal and supervisor, and a lot of other people that you could name, teachers, outstanding teachers, and I think that that was a key to a better school system, and the key to the system that you have today, the excellent teachers that Mr. Mayfield and others went out and recruited into the system. And I remember Mr. Pitcher, and part of his recruitment pitch was that St. Tammany was a garden spot of the South. This is where everybody needed to be. And he was pretty much on target with that. But Henry Mayfield was a brilliant person. He taught classes for LSU during the summer, and later on taught at Tulane. And I had a great deal of respect for him. And a school, I think, is being named for Mr. Mayfield now in the Slidell area, or has been named or will be. Of course, we have a one named for Mr. Brock and Mr. Pitcher and Sippy Shane. There was a lot of young men that at that time that Mr. Mayfield encouraged to get their master's degrees and train, and he had a cadre of young people around him that went on and did well later on in life. People like Clee Parker that went on to be president of Southeastern, and some of the young local leaders, Ralph Minitry and Hank Ferrer and Troy Jackson and Jimmy Hune and folks like that moved from teachers on to administrators and served St. Tammany quite well.
What were some of the challenges when you started teaching here or started as an administrator that you remember?
Well, of course, you didn't have hardly any technology. If you had to run off tests, you had to run them off on a memograph machine, one at a time. I would say that that was one of the challenges, that you didn't have a whole lot of technology to deal with. You had fairly good facilities. The people in St. Tammany have always been very generous in helping their schools. They've levied anywhere from 50 to 70 mills of property taxes to build the fine schools that they have today. Teaching back then was the same thing, I guess, as you have teaching today. It took the heart of the individual to go in there and have the pride and the desire to do a good job and to help children. You had some challenges, but the hard work of the people went beyond the challenges and allowed them to do, I think, a good job then as they do now.
And I know after you left St. Tammany, you went on and did a lot of other important things for education in our state. Could you share a few of those things that you've done?
Well, I went to Franklinton. I served there as principal for about 10 years, and then Kelly Nix, then state superintendent, asked me to come to the State Department of Education as assistant state superintendent in charge of vocational programs in the state, high school, business and office education, industrial arts, home economics, the trade and industrial VOTEC schools of the state. We had about 50 of those proprietary schools. So it's a pretty big job. It was an assistant superintendent position. I served in that during his term, and then I was applied for and was hired as superintendent of Monroe City Schools, and I served there for a number of years, and retired from that position. And Northeast Universities, before I retired, had asked me to teach some classes, and so I taught some at Northeast after my retirement as superintendent. And then some friends talked me into running for the State Board of Education, Bessie Board, and I was elected from the 5th District of Northeast Louisiana while living in Monroe, and a district that covers about a fourth of the state that I represented, and I served 16 years on Bessie, and I served 2 terms as president and 3 terms as vice president of the board. So it was, and a lot that I accomplished. I really give credit to people like Mr. Sam Mizell, one of my principals here, and Mr. I.F. Parker, a fine board member, Mr. Pitcher, in St. Tammany, Mr. Pitcher and Mr. Mayfield and others that really taught me how to be a teacher and how to be an administrator and to how to handle various situations. So to me, that was a basic training that I got here in St. Tammany that enabled me to do some other things for the state.
And I believe while you were superintendent of schools in Monroe, you were also selected as state superintendent.
I was selected as state superintendent, I think the year was 89 or 90. And that was really an honor, and there's only one out of, I think, 69 systems we have now. And by the way, last year, I believe Ms. Gail Salone, local superintendent, was selected as superintendent of the year.
She is
so it was a real honor. I didn't deserve it, but anyhow, it was an honor to get it.
Well, I'm sure you did deserve it. When you were on Bessie board, there were a lot of things happening in education. What were some of the big things that you remember from your time?
Well, I guess when I first came on the board, we had a challenge of a teacher evaluation system, and it had been imposed on teachers of the state that was just driving teachers crazy. It was a lot of paperwork. It was, I think it was called a TIP, Teacher Improvement Program, and it drove teachers crazy. They had to prepare a lot of paperwork for people to come in and look at, and it took away from their time to teach. And so I was determined to do something to change that, and I, along with others of the board, came up with a more reasonable teacher evaluation vehicle that would do the job and would not burden teachers with a lot of problems. And then we went into the accountability program. Actually, accountability started when I was assistant superintendent with Kelly Nick's administration in 1978, but we didn't follow up much on testing students. But in about 97, 98, when Governor Foster was elected, he was insistent that we have a detailed accountability plan. And we called in people from other states that had been ahead of us in accountability: Texas, Florida, Kentucky, and other states. An accountability commission, which I served on, along with about 25 other people, developed the accountability plan that we have today. And some people like it, some don't. The high stakes testing portion of it is not particularly liked by a lot of people, but I'll say this, that I supported the accountability plan, and it may have flaws in it, but it's produced dramatic increases in pupil achievement in the state. And to me, that's what the goal was, to really improve student achievement. So it's still going presently, and I think that it's probably ingrained in our system. It'll be changed from time to time, but I don't think accountability will go away, and I don't think it should.
What do you see as some of the challenges that our educators face today?
Well, pupil achievement is a report card for school systems and for teachers and for individual students. And the challenge of maintaining that high level of pupil achievement after you had your initial surge in test results, then to keep up that progress over a long period of time is very difficult. You reach some point of diminishing returns to where that pupil achievement will level off, or maybe in some instance go down. I think that's a challenge. Another challenge is getting parents involved with their kids at school, and them emphasizing the importance of education to the young people. Dropouts is a big problem. Illiteracy in our state. If you finish the 5th grade and drop out, not able to read, write, and compute, you're not in a very enviable position in society today, and we have a lot of people that are doing that. So I think that's one big problem that we've got. I think that a universal state-funded or federal-funded pre-kindergarten program that would be made available to all the kids would be a tremendous help in increasing pupil achievement, to get those youngsters early. And we're probably meeting the needs of about 2/3 of the kids in pre-kindergarten in the state. We need to meet the needs of all of those students.
I know you served on Bessie with our present state superintendent. How would you rate his efforts to improve Louisiana's education system?
I have actually worked with about 7 or 8 state superintendents, from Shelby Jackson to Bill Dodd and Louis Mishu and Kelly Nix, Tom Clausen, Dr. Ray Arvison, Bill Cody, Cecil Picard, and now Paul Pasterek. And all of them were hard-working, very honorable people. As far as rating the superintendents, I had a high regard for Kelly Nix and what actually was done during his term of office. Cecil Picard was absolutely a great guy. I love Cecil as a friend, as a person, and tremendous ability to work with the political arm of government, to work with people, and the experience as an educator.
And Cecil certainly was one that pushed the pre-K program.
He pushed the pre-K program.
Got us where we are today.
He really did.
Yes, he did.
And now we have, after Cecil died with Lou Gehrig's disease, we have Paul Pasterek. And, you know, time will tell. Paul has only been in there for a short period of time, but I had a hand in putting him in that position. When we voted on that, he asked me to make the nomination. I had worked with him as vice president of the board while he had served as president. And he is a very smart person. He can communicate well with legislators. I was impressed with him, impressed enough to make the motion for him to be state superintendent. And I think he's doing a good job. He has a learning curve that he has to develop, that Cecil Picard did not have that obstacle of not having served as a teacher or administrator, but he's a quick learner, and I feel like that he'll do a good job. He's going to make some mistakes and go back and correct these mistakes, but he's pushing the accountability program. One thing that I've got some reservation about is the charter school movement. If we're using charter schools to completely replace the system that we have, in some instances I don't think it's necessary. When we came into the New Orleans situation, after Katrina, we had to do something in a hurry, and the federal government gave us money for charter schools, and so we went into that process in Orleans, but to superimpose that throughout the state, it's more or less in the experimental stage, and academically to this point I've not seen that charters do any better than public schools. So Paul and I have a little bit of disagreement on that area, but I think Paul is going to do a good job.
Well, I know you've worked with a lot of different state superintendents, as you said, and you've also worked with a lot of different governors over the years. Who were some of the governors that you remember while you were in Bessie?
Well, I first, when I was president of State Teachers Association, I worked with John McKeithen, and McKeithen was a strong governor. I mean, he would give you his word, and that was it, and you knew where you stood. And we had worked with him to try to get a teacher salary raise for teachers and others, and I thought he was a good governor. Of course, after him, you had Edwin Edwards, and the most tremendous personality of any person you'll ever see. And I really liked Edwin Edwards, and he liked me. He appointed me to the state college board, and I didn't ask for any appointment, any favors, or whatever. But on the other hand, he got entangled with some people that were not doing the right thing, apparently, and so he had such tremendous ability, and had he not had that not happened, I don't know what he could have done. But I dealt with him. Of course, I liked Governor Foster. I thought he was a quiet, laid-back guy. You'd have a meeting with him, and he would sit over in the corner, wouldn't say much, and all of a sudden he'd say, "Wait a minute, I want to say this." And when he said it, you better listen. And he was usually on target. And I thought he made a good governor. And Kathleen Blanco was really good for education. She never got the credit she should have, but she went through the unfortunate situation with Katrina, and so that really blemished her record. And I don't know if anybody could have, what they could have done with such a disaster that we had there, but we quickly tried to rebuild our schools and do what we could do to help on that situation. And of course, Governor General, I met him a few times, and I've not had all that much contact with him. The first time I ever met him, my impression was, gosh, this man sure does talk fast. Had to slow up so me could understand it, but I know he's got a brilliant mind and has received national attention right now.
What are some of your fondest memories as an educator in St. Tammany?
I remember polio back during when I was a child was a terrible thing on the country. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president, had polio, and it crippled him for life, and many people. And they'd have quarantines when you have polio in a hospital and all that sort of thing. Well, Jonas Salk invented the polio vaccination, and I remember they got with the health department and went to all the schools, and they vaccinated people for polio for the first time. And I took my sugar cube down at Lacombe along with the other students, and that's something that stood out. While I was at Lacombe, one day I was going to the bank, taking the money to the bank in Mandeville, and over the radio it said, "We interrupt, there's been a terrible thing happened in Dallas, Texas. That President John Kennedy has been shot. We don't know what his conditions, but we know he's been shot." By the time I got to the bank and got back, I turned the radio and they confirmed that the president was dead. And so I said, this is historic. And we just gone down to New Orleans to hear the president in person with our 8th and 9th grade students a few months before when he spoke in New Orleans. So I called an assembly, a student body assembly of all the kids, and announced to them what had happened. I said, this is a terrible thing in our history, but I just wanted to announce to all. And a lot of those students to this day say, we remember when you called that assembly. And a lot of people were crying when they went out because, like I say, the kids had just gone down and heard him speak in New Orleans. It actually came out that Lee Harvey Oswald, who had been a student at Covington Elementary School for a short period of time, was the assassin of the president. Another time, I remember sleeping in the school during Hurricane Betsy, and it had a devastating effect in South St. Tammany around Slidell and that area, and thinking every time I had a puff of wind that it might go through the school, you know, but I slept in school during that time.
We've shown a couple of pictures already, and I know we have some more here. Let's look at some of these and see what other interesting items you brought in to share with us today.
And this is one of the 5th Ward Junior High School FFA group. This is vocational agriculture students, which I taught at that time, and I see some pictures in here. Some of these students have grown on up. One of them here, Russell Young, is a medical doctor in Arkansas with a very successful career, and another one was head of the state fireman organization in the state. Another one, Billy Croft, was honored with a Silver Star and Purple Heart for his service in Vietnam, and was highly decorated veteran. So a lot of these kids have gone on to greater things.
I believe this is one of your teams.
Yeah, this is the basketball team at 5th Ward Junior High. Coach Bob Allen was coaching the group at that time, and a lot of young men that, and I taught English, math, science, social studies, vocational agriculture, and helped with coaching the basketball team.
And here's an article about you.
Well, when I was promoted to state post, I give St. Tammany a great deal of credit for whatever I've ever accomplished. And the St. Tammany News banner, an article I tore out, said former Lacombe principal appointed to state post, and I was glad that they made that association.
And you've talked about Mr. Henry Mayfield, and here's his picture.
Henry Mayfield is one of the most phenomenal educators I think has ever been in St. Tammany. A brilliant mind. He was a supervisor. He inspired people. He let people know that they were doing wrong when they were doing wrong. He motivated people, planned all the in-service, and so it's just a great guy, and it's so appropriate that they're naming a school here in St. Tammany after him.
You were president of the Louisiana Teachers Association for a time, and tried to get an influential person in our country to come speak, and I believe you have a letter from him.
Well, Bill Pitcher also was president of the Louisiana Teachers Association many years before I was, and this was a big thing because the teacher organization included everybody from kindergarten through superintendents and college and higher education people, and so we had a big convention, and I was president, and we had about 23,000 members. And we made an effort to get Ronald Reagan, he was governor of California at the time, to come, and I communicated with his office, and we thought we had him, but at the last minute he backed out on us, and I had a letter here telling him he has declined because of problems in California.
And these are, I believe, some pictures of you with various governors of our state.
Yeah, this is one of I've got pictures with the last seven or eight governors, all except one, and I didn't necessarily want his picture, but this is with John McKeithen when we were signing a teacher raise, a bill through the legislature, a group in governor's office. Here's one with Governor Edwin Edwards when I was on the Board of Trustees for state colleges, meeting we had, and Dave Treen, and I had a good relationship with most all of these governors, and we had Dave Treen, by the way, is living here in St. Tammany at Beauchene, and the last time I saw him, he had invited me to come play golf with him sometime. I never have, but I thought Dave Treen did a good job. He was criticized for being a little slow in his actions, but I think a very honorable person.
And these are some of our representatives, I believe.
Yeah, and this is some of the representatives that helped the school system. Mr. Scoggin from Slidell, Bill Strain. They had an impact on the aid that we received here in St. Tammany.
And then our last three pictures, you can tell us
about
this
is the picture of the Rueton Club. It's a civic, social, nonprofit organization dedicated to helping the community. And this was the Rueton Club at Fifth Ward School at Bush. There was Mr. Howard Fauntleroy in the picture, and they got some kind of award for special service. Vic Grantham, James Hugh Jenkins, and myself, and very active in helping the school. If they needed a typewriter, or they need a copying machine, or they needed textbooks, or whatever, they did a lot to help the community at that time.
I know that you've received many awards and recognitions over your years in education. We've already mentioned the Superintendent of the Year award, but you also received a national award a couple of years ago, I believe. What was that?
This was through what we call a National Association of State Boards of Education, and our board members once or twice a year met with other board members throughout the nation for professional development, to be brought up to date on the cutting edge of what's going on in education in the nation. And so we met with all other states, and they annually give distinguished service awards to I don't know, 2 or 3 people in the nation that they think have had distinguished service as board members, and I was honored to get one of these. This was at the point when I retired after the last 16th year on the board. So again, it was an honor that I probably didn't deserve, but anyhow, they gave that at I think it might have been Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, I believe. Well, congratulations on that. As you think back over your many years in education, and you think of something humorous or touching that stands out in your mind?
I don't know. There's a lot of things you can laugh about, a lot of things that are humorous. I remember a little first grader at down at Bayou Lacombe School. At that time, we didn't have kindergarten. It didn't come in until about in the 70s. And the little first grader came to school for the first time, and school was out, and all the buses left. This little boy was left there. And so he was crying and didn't know what to do, and so we said, "Where do you live?" He said, "I live in a white house." And that's all we could get out of him. And we waited around for, I don't know, 45 minutes not knowing what to do. And so finally his mother came, but he was in distress. And it was probably 1,000 white houses within a mile of where we lived. But anyhow, that was pretty funny. Another time, a little first grader went into the room and she started crying. And so I brought her down to the office and I said, "Oh, don't cry, honey." I said, "You know everything's going to be all right." And I gave her some candy. She loved it. Next day she started crying. She came down, I gave her some candy. She loved that too. Well, she was sitting in my office and she wouldn't cry. So finally the teacher, Miss Birdahl, Lucille Birdahl, tremendous teacher, she said, "Let's try just sitting this little girl outside the class and let her listen. And as we do things, she might get interested." So Miss Birdahl started doing some little games and all, and so finally she sneaked in the class, and from then on, she was okay. And so
it's all about knowing and understanding your children.
You can expect the unexpected when you're dealing with those youngsters.
Anything else that you'd like to share? We're just about out of time.
Well, after I left St. Tammany, and I stayed here 10 years, which is a very small amount, a small glimpse of what was going on, I still kept in touch with St. Tammany. And while I served on the state board, I would get I had the school performance scores on all the schools and the school systems. And I really looked with admiration at what the people here in St. Tammany have done. The public has supported their schools. They've got good teachers. They rank well in comparison with other systems in the state, usually in the top 2 or 3 school systems in the state, whether it be ACT scores or the Iowa Test of Educational Development, whatever it might be. And so this kind of makes you proud of the people and what they have done here. They've really supported their schools, and people can come in a community confident that their kids are going to get a good education. In fact, the school system back about, I think, 8 or 10 years ago was judged as one of the 100 top school systems in the nation. And so that gives the people here a reason to be very proud of what's going on educationally.
If you could give some advice or words of wisdom to a beginning teacher or a new principal as to what they should teach our students, what would you tell them?
Well, I think I would tell them first, before that, what Mr. Sam Mizell at Fifth Ward School told me when I first started teaching. He said, "You start and hold a tight rope on those children. And you can always loosen that rope, but you want to start real strict and make them behave, and then you can always loosen up a little bit. And then put your best effort into it and try to picture yourself as not only a teacher, but as a mother or father of that child, to do with that child what you think would benefit them and make them a better citizen as they grow up." So a lot of it comes from the heart and from the internal desire to do well to do your best, and so that's a lot of it right there. And not be a clock watcher. Get the job done, and not say I'm going to leave here at 3:01 because that's all they're paying me for. That's not dedication and devotion to the job.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. I've enjoyed meeting with you and hearing your stories.